Many of you have heard about the elongated skulls found in Paracas, Peru, and in other parts of the earth. Although the existence of these skulls is not a new discovery, their genetic origins are just beginning to come to light, thanks to the research and work of men like Brien Foerster, David Hatcher Childress, and the late Lloyd Pye. Mainstream science has largely ignored the enigma of who these strange human-like entities were, and why their anatomy was so different than our own, indiscriminately writing them off as more examples of cranial deformation and cradle boarding, even when such claims cannot be substantiated by any proof whatsoever. In fact, the contrary is true. It is extraordinarily obvious to both the amateur and trained observer alike that many of the elongated skulls, particularly of Paracas, are not the result of artificial manipulation of any kind, but of organic, genetic variation. A mere rudimentary examination of these skulls proves this fact conclusively. Besides the observable difference in the plates of the skulls, many of which have 2 plates as opposed to 3 like human beings, their cranial masses are much larger than our own. These are miracles which cranial deformation and cradle boarding simply cannot perform, no matter how fervent the faith of their proselytizers. Of course, it should come as no surprise to us that mainstream science is hasty to ignore or gainsay such evidences, and even excoriate those who assert them. If we are indeed dealing with a new kind of humanoid species, as the abnormalities of these skulls suggest, and the genetic evidence is beginning to indicate, then human history as we know it must be revised to include this alternate race. But don't hold your breath. The Darwinian paradigm quickly collapses beneath the weight of such a revelation, and you can expect the party line to be aggressively maintained, no matter how provocative or decisive the evidence to the contrary may be. Furthermore, the power brokers of society are Luciferian, controlling such institutions as the Smithsonian, the Vatican, and all of the premier universities around the world. Luciferians literally have a monopoly on knowledge. It would not be in their best interest to promote or even permit the disclosure of any artifact that could expose the hidden history of our planet, or even merely undermine the gigantic farce that is evolution by natural selection, a doctrine they themselves propagate to cover up the true nature of the human condition. But for those clear-thinking individuals who are not beguiled by Luciferian propaganda, the implications of the elongated skulls are unprecedented. Consider the testimony of the geneticist working with the samples provided by Brien Foerster, which were extracted from one of the red-haired skulls in Paracas, Peru. Quote, "It had mitochondrial DNA with mutations unknown in any human, primate, or animal known so far. But a few fragments I was able to sequence from this sample indicate that if these mutations will hold, we are dealing with a new human-like creature, very distant from Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans. I am not sure it will even fit into the known evolutionary tree." End quote. Indeed it won't, for 2 primary reasons. First, because these human-like creatures should be situated above us on the so-called evolutionary tree, due to the amplified cranial volume of their skulls, which is indicative of larger brains, ergo, smarter entities. And second, because as the late Lloyd Pye used to say, Darwin was a blowed-up peckerwood. The ridiculous claims of evolution can no longer be taken seriously by logically thinking individuals. A gradual shift towards intervention theory is already beginning to undermine and will eventually replace the outdated and unfounded theory of evolution. But that's the subject of another episode. There is, of course, a plethora of physical evidence strewn across the surface of our planet in many ruinous heaps, pointing to the fact that human beings were not the only intelligent entities inhabiting the earth. There existed, and still exist to this day, human, non-human hybrids from various origins and of various kinds, not the least of which were giants. Cranial deformation was an expression of emulation, a crude attempt to imitate these human, non-human hybrid races that were venerated as demigods by the ancients. The reason why the cranial deformation phenomena was so widespread across the earth, rather than localized to one people group or continent, is because the distribution of the hybrid races was also widespread, a fact that is being borne out in the discovery of elongated skulls in diverse locations across the globe. So what's the bottom line here? Simply this, that human beings were never alone on this planet. There have always been, and are to this day, alternate human-like sentient races cohabiting the earth with us. Enter Karen Hudes. You may remember Karen Hudes as the famous whistleblower at the World Bank who exposed the endemic of corruption permeating through that organization. Recently, she shocked the world with a stunning allegation involving the Vatican and a human-like race she calls Homo capensis. Before we get into the specifics of the allegation, let's review Karen's credentials. Karen Hudes is a graduate of Yale Law School, and she worked in the legal department of the World Bank for more than 20 years. In fact, when she was fired for blowing the whistle on the corruption inside the World Bank, she held the position of senior counsel. Aside from studying law at Yale, Karen studied economics at the University of Amsterdam. She worked in the U.S. Export-Import Bank from 1980 to 1985, and in the legal department of the World Bank from 1986 to 2007. She established the Non-Governmental Organization Committee of the International Law Section of the American Bar Association, and the Committee on Multilateralism and the Accountability of International Organizations of the American branch of the International Law Association. Suffice it to say, Karen Hudes is not the village idiot. Her allegations against the World Bank were not baseless conspiracies, but validated facts. She had the courage to tell the truth and was summarily fired for it. Now to her latest allegations, which are far more explosive than corruption at the World Bank. While discussing the global banking cartel in a FutureMoneyTrends.com interview, Karen said the following when asked, who is in control of the Vatican? Quote, "There's a second species on this planet. They're not extraterrestrial. This group has large brains. They're very distinct from Homo sapiens. Their DNA is so different that if the two species mated, their offspring would be infertile. And we know this because their DNA was just tested. They have skulls all over the place because they have been on the earth with us. They've been hiding. And one of the places that they've been hiding is at the Vatican." End quote. In subsequent interviews on the internet, Karen expounds on her bizarre allegation and says that this hidden non-human race, designated Homo capensis, is controlling not only the Vatican, but the entire global banking cartel. She explains that, whereas they do not have the same capacity for creativity as the human race, Homo capensis far exceeds us in their capacity for analytical and mathematical calculation due to their larger brains, making them the perfect puppet masters of the complex banking system. Whether or not all of Karen's accusations are true, we can verify with certainty that the race she describes did in fact exist on the planet at some time. Besides the evidence of their bones, the influence of Homo capensis is apparent in the priesthoods and potentates of the past, and in some cases the present, who seem to imitate this large-headed race in the wearing of tall mitres, turbans, and crowns. Now, I'm not claiming that every occasion of tall headdresses is direct emulation of Homo capensis. But as we have noted with cranial deformation, human beings have been attempting to style themselves after the cone-headed gods for ages. And this brings me to the final point of this episode. The overwhelming evidence of human, non-human elongated skulls, together with that of megaliths, ancient technology, and corroborating planetary legends about the gods and their hybrid offspring, points to an ancient world teeming with abominable creatures, mythical beasts, and towering giants. A world well defined and delineated within the pages of the Bible. And it exposes the reality that the controllers of our world have gone to great lengths to hide from your eyes the fact that we are not alone and never have been. It's time for us to wake up from the comatose of Luciferian propaganda. The history of the planet on which we live is vastly different than what we've been indoctrinated to believe. There are myriads of intelligent hybrid entities that have been interacting with, manipulating, and infiltrating the human race for eons. Though their genomes differ one from another, they all share two things in common. They are all malevolent and subject to the devil, and they all hate the human race and its kinsman redeemer. I'm Timothy Alberino, reporting for GenesisXGiants.com.